Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us Mr. Harry Gross. Welcome, Harry. Once again, you're a purveyor of many interesting ideas. Hopefully, we can put some of them out for the public to observe. So we've had discussions on really a lot of the societal differences that exist, the tensions that are in the country. We see it everywhere. There are people with really different, you could say, backgrounds, economic interests, religious interests, different allegiances, and cultural histories. We're all intermixed, 350 million people and their sharp elbows out there. And we've discussed that into some detail. One of the things going on is in universities. I know you teach in Mercer, and it's a place where a marketplace for ideas. Ideas are going back and forth, and in many places, the intensity of the idea exchange is very difficult for people, and there are places. There's a concept in the academic village of safe spaces. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not sure how well we can define that, but a safe space would be a place where you could go and whatever negative opinions might be tossed against you would not happen. So you could go into this particular alcove, and presumably people that would be offensive would not be allowed in this space, or had offensive opinions, and people would get reassurances from that. Now, I'll just segue into that to say, well, people pursue safe spaces, safe meaning where people in outgroups don't turn up, whatever the outgroup would be, and that ideas that are against a person's perceived truth are not allowed. Now, so it would be, presumably, if this concept existed, it would be a very pleasant environment to exist, to be in. And actually, this can be seen in country clubs, in different kinds of clubs, or political organizations, or maybe different kinds of save the planet arrangements. So it's a pretty common situation, and it's an attractive thing for people to just go through their daily activities and not observe anyone particularly different than they would be, and to not hear any ideas that irritate them. Now, trying to legitimize that is quite a task. And do you have thoughts about that?
I think at the most extreme end, what you've described is perhaps true. For me, when I talk about having a safe space in my classroom, what I mean is that my class is supposed to be free of ad hominem attacks. The only line I draw for conversation, for discussion, because I have a very discussion-heavy class,
yes,
is as long as you are not actively denying the humanity of another human being, as long as you are not actively attacking someone for something that is outside of their control, such as their race or their looks or their sexuality or something like that, then everything's kind of on the table, and that you should redirect. The goal of a safe space is to redirect, discussion and debate away from people to ideas, right? That it's challenging the idea, not the person. That you don't look at who the messenger is. You look at what the message is.
Well, how hard is it to define an ad hominem attack? And I mean, okay, well, you're whatever, you should be ashamed of your feet or something. I don't know. You could something like that. I don't know, but all right. Well, I think we can agree with a lot of that. But if a person is particularly sensitive, mm-hmm. And I think I've seen this come up. The person said, well. That particular patient is from the ghetto or whatever, mm-hmm. something like that. And it was no offense, and it was just a use of a word to describe, I guess, a certain kind of racial arrangement. I don't know what word mm-hmm. you might use, but the person used it in a very benign way, or intended it to be a benign way, but people took offense to that. So isn't that one of the issues that goes on in creating safe space? So I think people could agree with, if you're insulting a person's feet, so to speak, whatever you want to say, or whatever, whatever. I mean, there's something wrong with you, and we're going to just mock you for that. But what about if the person is extremely sensitive and defines the dialogue? So you want to talk about, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about, the Civil War or whatever. Well, it's the war between the states. If you use the word Civil War, I'm insulted. So I insist that you use the war between the states. And if you don't, I'm going to do something bad to you. I mean, whatever you do, and I think the punishment is often to demonize a person that used the word Civil War versus the war between the states, or examples like that. What are your comments about that?
I think, one, it all depends on trust. The goal of a safe space, academically at least, is to build a trust building exercise where anyone can feel comfortable existing and sharing their opinions in a way that they can build trust with their classmates and with the professor, right? To get to a place where they feel more comfortable exchanging more opinions over time. In an environment such as maybe a hospital or doctor-patient relationship, trust can often be very slow to come by and often very low, right? And that really determines ultimately how people will read in. If someone is willing to trust you, or there's a degree of trust, they're more likely to give you leeway and assume best intentions rather than worst. One of my classroom rules is always assume best intentions at this point, to give someone a leeway in case they say something stupid, because we all say something stupid. And we all are prone to misreading and misinterpreting things. But I think that crafting that space requires, one, a great deal of patience, and two, a certain power dynamic. Safe spaces don't work in kind of equal arrangements. You have to have someone willing to enforce it, right? It works in an academic environment because you have a professor whose job is to say, hey, I'm going to referee this. This is okay, this isn't okay. And then there are methods, and there are, sometimes there is the threat of maybe a student doesn't like something that a professor says, and they could be reported to a dean, but there's usually a process to determine if that, whether that speech was deemed to be problematic, intentional, whatever. There's more of a process to go with that in that sense. When it's just two individuals, right? If I say Civil War, you say war between the states, and you get offended or I get offended, and then one of us walks away, that's it. That's the end of the discussion.
Yes.
There's no dialogue possible at that point.
Well, one of the things are reporting. So in other words, one of the issues that can take place in this environment, and I know times this has happened, where a professor might give his opinion. Mm-hmm. So this is what my opinion is on some issue. Mm-hmm. And a person might be deeply offended by that statement. Mm-hmm. And the professor can be reported, and then all kinds of negative things would happen. So, and you could say that idea is, so if people want the system changed for whatever, there's a group of people that want the system changed, they want the ideas changed, and they have the clout that we talked about, power. They have the power to enforce their viewpoints, and the way the power can be exercised would be if someone, they'd like to be in a safe place, a safe space, where ideas that are offensive to them would not exist, and there's a mechanism to stop those ideas from appearing. And if so you mentioned your classroom, presumably there's something outside your classroom, so you're sort of enforcing these rules to your classmates or class people. Yeah. And
as soon as they leave the room, though, I have no control.
I know that. But so what could happen, if I could say this, is free speech can be suppressed under the rubric of safe space. So is there, and that's something to be alarmed about. So the idea of the sensitivity people have to different thoughts and different ideas, just not being able to sit in the same room where they're being expressed might be understandable. It could be understandable, but the rules that would protect a person's safe space might be so overwhelming that society can't easily function. If for instance, if somebody's just accidental, which is not an uncommon event, they might say any number of things, like "I like your shoes," and they said it with sort of a mocking, and the person was sensitive about their shoes, and they said "I like your shoes," but they didn't mean that, and the person's expression meant it didn't, and so then the person could presumably report the person. So you could get in a society where the idea of tremendous censorship could occur, and that's the operative word, could occur if the idea of unlimited protection of a person's safe space would exist. And of course, the world is what it is. If you feel like you're in an academic environment and your concept of safe space is whatever, it's rigorously protected and whatever, and you turn out to be somewhat of a snowflake, if one can say that. You're out of the lusty world, and people are yelling and snorting and stepping on your foot. And are you doing a favor for a person if they sort of tough ideas are not put before them?
Well, again, I mean, I can only speak to what I do in this sense. I think there is obviously a problem with an extreme to a safe space. I think the example you've given, I think, frankly, is a bit out there, but there is a possibility that could be interpreted based on tone or whatever, but that's not really a safe space. Again, safe spaces are about trying to prevent ad hominem attacks and on the dignity of a human being as they're perceived. Now, some people are overly sensitive. Now, I see it I have not yet had to deal with this over 5 years of teaching now, but I see it as my job is to do two things. One is to protect my students and make them feel that they matter. Mm-hmm. But I also have a responsibility to educate them. Mm-hmm. And that means exposing them to tough ideas, right? That means exposing them to things they don't necessarily want to hear. Now, as long as those ideas do not cross the line into denying their humanity or to saying that they don't have a right to exist or that they are wrong for simply being, those ideas are totally fine. Anything goes in that sense, right? Anyone in my classroom is welcome to articulate a view as long as they can back it up with evidence. It's another rule I have. You can't just say things off the top. You have to be able to back it up with something. As long as it does not directly attack a group or an individual for their right to exist, right, and deny their humanity or basic dignity. Like today, we've been talking about the Nazis and having hard conversations about Nazism and different beliefs, and recognizing that we all have the potential to become a Nazi about something. Because, as you've said, it's human nature to judge and to read into people and to try and put yourself above someone else, right? The purpose of a safe space academically is to be able to engage with hard conversations in a way that people can build trust and feel comfortable and learn. And that's a side effect of a society that has largely put down certain groups and prevented them from being able to learn.
Well, Harry, we've discussed the word safe, and that's a very attractive concept for people, isn't it? I mean, who would disagree with being safe? But can you be safe? And is that I was saying that would empower a very sensitive person who would be the person that drew the boundaries. Now, you've attempted to draw your boundaries, but if the turn of phrase is "I don't feel safe," therefore, the whole, that your comment about the Civil War didn't make me feel safe. So because you violated this rule, I'm going to make sure you get punished for that. If you see what I mean, there could be some punishment attached to a person that is asserting this. I think no ad hominem attacks. I think that's a much more restrictive use of the word. I'd say that.
I try to take it literally in that sense, because I think anyone who is allowed to feel like they have a right to never be uncomfortable is being done a disservice.
Well,
A deep disservice.
unless from ego purposes, that anytime they feel unsafe, they can assert their will. So it's an empowering kind of thing. I've been or whatever it is, pushed down in the world, but now I've got this cudgel that I can really use, and the person that decides whether something is right or wrong is me, because I'm the only person that knows if I feel safe or not. I mean, you can see where that just having that well, I guess what I finally say is that use of those words is inappropriate, and if they're produced, and maybe they are, maybe they're in the regulations of universities, or I'm assuming somewhere they might be, that safe space will be observed or whatever. And if you feel like your safety is not, your psychological safety is not being protected, you may do something against the perpetrators of whatever. I mean, you can see where that goes, particularly in a country with so much societal tension in it.
I think the deeper question always has to be like I've never had to deal with this, but if I ever had a student hear an idea and feel I don't feel safe, I don't feel comfortable with this, my first reaction is always going to be why, because I think that the job of the educator, a good educator, is to help students learn about themselves.
Well, what happens if they say they don't want to talk about it? And I'll exercise my power.
Then my answer is going to be, okay, well, if you don't want to talk about it and you don't feel comfortable, then you're free to leave.
No,
that's my answer. Is you don't have to. You can excuse yourself in this conversation.
You could say that, but it depends on how empowered this. And what I'm sort of getting at is many groups of people feel like they've been mistreated in the world, and so. This is a very attractive idea.
I understand. I think for me, I have to rest in the knowledge and trust in the process, the fact that I know that I have not willingly and intentionally tried to hurt someone in any way, capacity, or form. And I have to trust in that form. So I'm not worried about punishment or reaction because I am not committed any issue. Now, I think people who are deeply worried about saying something and being punished, I think that betrays something else about them. But I think that if a student were ever to try and punish me for something that I've said, I will stand by everything I've ever said in a classroom. I don't say something in a classroom unless I 100% believe it or I feel that it's correct to the best of my factual knowledge, and I'll trust the process of the university.
Well, that's the question about the process. So suppose the process is, and you could see on the right and the left how this is happening. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? So maybe in the, democratic world, these sort of leftist regulations, if you want to say, or put there, whatever they are. I mean, they're different. And now it's really extraordinary. So the Republican administration is now saying pretty much the converse in many ways. So you're going to lose your funding unless you do this or that. And the same thing, I think, has happened on the left. Is I want a reformed world, and we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And if your viewpoint is clashes with whatever the prevailing dogma is, I mean, you could get a nip. And so people, they understand they could get a nip. And so, and I think we could say that. So if, in a deeply democratic administration, whatever the deal was, let's say females in male sports or something, whatever. I don't know, something that's, we've got to really have open the door. We want everybody to have access to whatever the deal is. And if you don't think that, then you're going to get in trouble. And now I think things are on the right, and really it's impressive to me, the power of the government to basically just attempt to manipulate the psyche of different academic institutions. And so if you have your opinion, I don't have to worry about this because I feel comfortable in my personal ethics and the way that the university will back me up. What happens if the university doesn't back you up? You mentioned Nazi Germany, or we could say East Germany later. Nazi Germany, and then East Germany later, somehow advocating capitalism or whatever. I mean, so many people just keep their heads down in this arrangement.
No, there
They
is.
just
I, mean,
keep their heads-
I
they
would
just-
say
they-
there is a fundamental difference, though, in how right-wing and left-wing responses to power typically go. Left-wing typically, now I say typically because there are always exceptions, tries to use shame as their punishment more than anything else, to shame their perceived wrongdoer into either changing something or backing down or whatever. Appeals to morality and stuff. The
that's
right wing much more typically uses power as a cudgel. They don't use shame as an appeal. They typically say, you are going to do this, or I'm going to revoke your funding, or you're going to lose your job, or I'm going to throw you in prison. That tends to be the right-wing approach to the same thing. If you actually look at what professors are reported, and for what, professors that espouse more conservative views typically don't get reported to the university for like major values unless they do something truly horrific. They tend to get protested, or they tend to get maligned, publicly by students, but there's not really official action taken. Left-wing professors are much more likely to be reported by conservative students to the administration. The clearest of this has always been discussions of Israel and Palestine. That is a third rail in academia. And that's something that I've been teaching for 5 years now. I walk that line very, very carefully.
Well, that's an issue.
Because that is something that is very often used by students who do not like whatever the professor is saying, and that tends to be reported. And it's usually more conservative students doing the reporting of more liberal
Well, that's a big
professors.
question, isn't it? I didn't think there were many conservative professors.
There actually are. Well, now granted, that's because academia tends to prefer people with very open minds and
maybe.
and more respect for diversity of thinking, which the right wing is not famous for producing.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there are other reasons, but I'd say there are reasons for it, and it.
Oh, there are lots of
there are
reasons.
lots
It's self-selection. It's ultimately what it is.
So, what do you want to do? Well, I'd like to have a new car, or I really just want to read this book all night, or something like that.
Humanities tends to produce more left-wing folks. Science, engineering, and economics tend to produce more conservative folks.
Well,
I have rarely met left-wing professors of economics. Now, I've met a few. I've had a couple.
Right.
Most professors of economics tend to be more conservative. Most history professors tend to be a mix. Most art professors tend to be more left-wing. It's a self-selection.
Well, I mean, we get into it, but what I think your point, sort of the point that I see is that we have safe space, we have academic rules, and then the powerful government sort of changes the playing field, and I think we're seeing that. It's impressive, really. To me, it is very impressive. So you could more or less, I would say, the way that academics existed, say in 1960, it was fairly conservative in many ways, and I think so. And then the government just put in different kinds of rules, coeducation. The females arose, so to speak, and assumed a very powerful position with a different kind of worldview. That's overstating it slightly, but I think it's fair. So the whole power matrix in universities changed a lot, and it became more inclusive, and the different rules were different, and so the things substantially went to the left step by step. And of course, the academics were, it's my generation, the issues with Vietnam, whatever, protests, all kinds of young people are doing this, young people are doing that. So the rules changed, but and so over time, the general the water temperature in academics, if you want to, whatever, went more toward espousing liberal views. And now, out of the blue, I mean, it's very, very, very impressive to me.
Well,
and there's
I would
really
say
impressive.
that academia has always been more liberal, has always been more left-wing, everywhere. In every society, if you look at across the political spectrum, academics tended to be, this is the same true as Germany in the 1920s, France in the 1880s, London in the 1880s, the United States in the 1960s. Universities tend to be more liberal than the rest of society in general. Now, that does not mean there's not conservative institutions. This is just as a blanket average.
Right.
The intelligentsia tends to largely be more liberal by virtue of the ideas that established. That is not to say there's not right-wing intelligentsia, but if you look at who typically forms the basis of left-wing movements, it's often academics.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Now, just one thing I might say about it is if you go back to the founding of universities in Western Europe, they were strongly connected with the church,
Yes.
and the church was strongly supportive of the government and that general system.
Well,
So if you're-
sometimes.
Well, generally, I mean, what century you're in. Generally, I think. So the universities were known to be fairly conservative, and they supported. Copernicus had a hard time. Whatever. I mean, just floating around the general how new ideas and new thoughts about social structure didn't really hatch too much out of universities, and so
Well, often they did. I mean, again, if we talk about conservative versus liberal or conservative versus radical, is really the better axis to look at here. Is that conservatism is about maintaining the status quo fundamentally as a philosophy. That's what makes a movement conservative or not. It's not necessarily right wing or left wing. You can have a conservative left wing. It's just more associated with the right wing than the left. But universities are inherently less conservative because they are typically idea factories and that typically challenge the status quo. Yes, sometimes they're not as friendly, and historically we can find examples of the opposite, but that the university environment is the idea factory of society.
You know, I'll make one comment on that. I think you're largely correct in that. However, there's an exception with business schools. So that's an no. I mean, I think that's played itself out at the University of Virginia, where the business school there was attempted to famously take out the university president, and there was a lot of political. I'm not giving the story enough detail. But in fact, it didn't work, and the people that tried to do that were the business people that were in the business school. So I think that's a thing to remember. And one thing that's often separates the issues would be whether you're pursuing the blue alpine flower independently. You're in academics. The blue alpine flower is really understanding exactly what Mary, Queen of Scots, thought when she was imprisoned by Elizabeth, exactly what was in her mind. I can't rest until I know that. Well, that's a blue alpine flower, and there's probably not any money in it for you or whatever, and so you're going after pure ideas. If you're, once again, all generalizations are odious, but if you're attempting, you're an engineer or you want to establish a big company of some type or another, and you're in the university to get the information with the reward being a big saddlebag full of shekels. That's your ambition. So obviously there's going to be a difference between these two mindsets. Mm-hmm. Well, Harry, as you go forth, are you have any final profound thoughts to share with our audience?
On this topic, I would say this. I think that academic freedom is one of the most important cornerstones of a healthy society, but that comes with responsibilities too. That when you create a culture that seems to cater towards the most extreme of either side, you're going to get problems. And a good academic and a healthy academic environment protects students from themselves and from others, but also make sure that they get the tough love that they need to grow.
Now, one final comment. So is the role of a university to be the place where, being neutral in a way, this is a place where the ideas are going to be debated, and our responsibility is just to keep the marketplace open, not to take sides. And I think, and actually that was, I think that's one of the things that goes on, and we see it. You mentioned the Middle Eastern dilemma, and how the university played its role in that was famously known, and that may be the time for another conversation.
Yeah. I would say I think neutrality, not neutrality is the wrong word. Objectivity is the goal of the academic idea market. Academia does not have a responsibility to play host to bad ideas or to factually incorrect ideas. It does have a responsibility to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to learn and potentially fail, which is the best way of learning in many ways,
yes.
Right? By trying different things. It should be a whiteboard where you can just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. But it should not mean that bad ideas are given equal weight with good ideas at the same time.
Well, okay. Well, it's great hearing your comments, and we look forward to doing this some more.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Harry.